Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning to discuss this really important topic. We really appreciate just you giving your time to discussing just how important these issues are right now. We have a number of people with us today. I believe we have over 40. So I'm going to go ahead and do roll call just to kind of make sure things go as quickly as possible. If you could go ahead and type your name and affiliation in the chat box, just so that we have kind of a record of everyone who's joined, that would be great. Today we've got Kevin Drake with Alibi Works, Christy Thompson, Peter Fanolio from the Contractors Association, Allison Schwedner with CCTT, Rory O'Farrell with Channel 8, Beth Tanoff with the Donner Summit Association, Emily Vitus with JPA, Colin Froelich with Landing Locals, Alexis Olar with Mountain Area Preservation, Heidi Volkart Alstead with Martis Fund, Supervisor Hardy Bullock, Mike Dent, and Brian Foss with Nevada County, Billy Griffin with New Moon Naturals, Brett Williams with NLTRA, Jeff Hentz and Samir Tuma with NLTRA, Amy Kalberg with North Star Vale Resorts, Kathy Foley with North Tahoe Homeless Services, Jerusha Hall with North Star Vale, Alexander Moraletos, Bradley Johnson, and Sue Daniels with NTPUD, Fred Ilfeld with Olympic Valley PSD, Crystal Jacobson with Placer County, Emily Setzer with Placer County, and Supervisor Cindy Gustafson with Placer County. We also have Landon Wolf, Supervisor Bonnie Gore, and Jamie Payne with Placer County, Steve Frisch with SBC, Jennifer Sharp with Squaw Valley, Monica Petty with Sugar Bowl, Kylie Bigelow with Tahoe City Downtown Merchants, Dave Wilderrotter with Tahoe Daves, Chase Janvin with Tahoe Prosperity Center, Sean Barclay with TCPUD, Hillary Hobbs, Shauna Doherty with Town of Truckee, Councilmember Polavy and Councilmember Romack with Town of Truckee, and Bob Womack with Town of Truckee, Karen Fink and John Hester with TRPA, John Falk with TSBOR, Rick Stevens with TTAD, Tamia Grisette with TTCF, Claire Novak with United for Action, and we also have Benjamin Trustman, Judith Arellano, Scott Keith, and Johnny Rosher. Was there anyone that I missed? Great. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we get into the agenda, I just want to provide folks with a glimpse of our meeting agreements. Christina, if you could go ahead and provide those. Everyone here is likely familiar with them, but we want to make sure that everyone's opinion is respected, that everyone is listened to, so that's why we provide these glimpse of these at every single meeting. Okay, and here's also a preview of the agenda. Just noting today that we're going to provide a discussion of how some of the other communities in Colorado and other areas have been attacking housing challenges, as well as discussing the results of the poll that all of you participated in, and thank you for doing so, and getting into breakout sessions as well in order to more specifically discuss some of the ideas for solutions that each of you had. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Stacy to talk a little bit about why we are here today, and to introduce Danielle Hughes, who spoke to Placer County's Board of Supervisors earlier this week about the housing crisis, and is going to relay some of those concerns to us this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tara. Thank you to the TTCF team for putting this together. This is a unique time. It's kind of, where do you know where you are when you've been in a crisis as long as you have been? And many of us know that the world is shifting beneath our feet, not only from a global pandemic, but the results to our housing stock. And so just some quick stats that have been kind of flying around the community more recently. 45% increase in real estate sales with a 70% increase in median home prices. 94% of our respondents of our recent community needs survey are having trouble finding houses. We're learning that affordability, while it is a significant situation, it's less of a barrier. It really is about housing inventory. Our community members have been displaced, 25% of them, based on our needs survey, and Moody's and Moonshine Inc. and all of us are experiencing unprecedented wage increase requirements to stay competitive in the business marketplace. And so we are here to convene. That's what Mountain Housing Council does. We've built this muscle as a region in order to respond to things like this. We're built for this. And so with that, I want to just first ground us in what we know. And I appreciate Danielle being available. She had a very powerful story to share at the Placer County meeting this past Tuesday, and we asked if she would consider bringing that forward to us today. And so with that, Danielle, thank you so much. We'd love to hear your comments.
Danielle, are you there?
It doesn't look like we have Danielle on yet.
Ah, okay.
No problem. I will go ahead and just paint some pictures that we have been
Actually,
looking
she's
at.
joining right now.
Oh, okay, great.
Danielle is now with us. Stacey, if you would like to just introduce her again.
Danielle Hughes, we are so glad that you're here today. Your comments at the Placer County meeting were very powerful and very articulate. And we thought that our Mountain Housing Council partners would benefit from hearing your words. And so as a board member of the North Tahoe PUD, we're pleased to have you here today.
Thank you, and my apologies, my internet went down there for a second. So good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Hughes, and I'm a community member of Carnelian Bay, and also a director at North Tahoe PD, and a member of your essential workforce up here in Lake Tahoe. I'm here today, to express my concerns on the workforce housing issue that we're facing and the crisis that we're in, the immediate crisis that we're in now. I continue to hear from our members of our community, including the grocery store clerks, our pet store operators, restaurants, hotel workers, and even the government workers here in Lake Tahoe, that housing is not an option for them. Our employers are finding it increasingly difficult to sustain community services due to the scarcity of workforce and the employee housing available. And the seasonal demands create even more challenges here. This crisis has been exacerbated by COVID-19, with already astronomical housing prices only becoming further out of reach to those who have longstanding history supporting the vitality of our communities as the competing demands continue to increase. We have a housing market serving wealthier groups able to sustain Bay Area wages while working remotely, vacation rentals, and second homeowners. While those at the bottom and the middle incomes are most affected, the housing crunch hits every demographic. Land scarcity, rapid escalating construction costs, and permitting process encumbered by environmental regulations creates additional challenges for implementation. And the high visitation demand creates conflicting voices in our communities and services when bringing forth solutions, all of which make this problem and your solutions a very complex situation. Our workforce are having to live out of their cars, their tents, in RVs, in business parking lots, and in forest lands, or on others' couches, desperately trying to hold on to their place in this community. And while many others are just having to leave. We are in a crisis, and the time for creative solutions is now. Our nurseries, our hardware stores, our restaurants are all having to reduce their hours and days of operations. Our schools cannot find teachers. Our kids cannot ride the bus to school due to lack of bus drivers. And many businesses have had to make the choice to permanently move to other communities because they can no longer sustain the personnel and financial burdens to keep their businesses going. Yet with increased visitation and changing trends and populations that are not yet captured in the recent census, the demand continues to increase. Our workforce is the lifeblood of our communities, and I urge you all to think outside of the box today. It is important to understand that we don't fit in many of the typical solutions being brought forth, both at the state and federal level. We don't typically rank well for many of the discretionary funding sources to support housing, which tend to be urban-centric. Thus, we must advocate for the solutions that work for our region. Workforce and affordable housing are essential for sustaining strong communities, strong businesses, and strong local economies. We need to consider both temporary and permanent solutions because the impacts of not doing so now are here now, and we will continue to have those detrimental impacts to those that we are here to serve. So thank you for having me, and sorry for the losing you guys shortly, but I appreciate you guys reaching out to me. Thank you.
We're really grateful, Danielle. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. You're welcome to stay on if you have the time. We'd love to have your input. Yes. So the question is, when you've been in a crisis for so long, how do you know you're really in a state of emergency? And it really is reflective in not only the data, but the stories we're hearing and the impacts we're seeing. And Danielle did a fantastic job of capturing that. In addition, we're seeing other communities around the country struggling with the same issue. And we have for some time. This is nothing new to our Mountain Housing Council that has been convening for nearly 4 years now. And over those 4 years, we have built new capacity in the region. Our organizations have added new strategy, new personnel. They've adopted new programs. We've voted for new funding mechanisms for housing. So if you feel like nothing is happening with housing around this region, look again. All you have to do is go to Mountain Housing Council's website to see the dedicated group of Mountain Housing Council partners that are here today and were willing to convene in an emergency meeting that is off schedule from our regular quarterly meetings. And I want to just acknowledge Supervisor Gustafson for really encouraging and prompting this response. So with that, we have shared some articles that you can see of the way that other communities similar to us have been responding. And the stories that you have read in those articles feel very familiar and oftentimes are very similar to what you hear in our storytelling feature of our quarterly meetings. One unique particular response that has bubbled up, and many of you have asked us to explore this, is this idea of an emergency declaration. And so just to kind of put a finer point on that before we go through all of the survey results in detail and go into our breakout sessions, what we have learned is in these emergency declarations, you have a little more flexibility at the jurisdictional level around land use categories, funding allocations, approval processes being expedited, and use of public lands and property. And so we don't know if this is the right thing, but what we do know is a lot of the ideas that were bubbled up that you'll get to explore in breakout sessions might be dependent on some creative jurisdictional strategy. And so do know that that is on the agenda today, but it is one of many, and it's really up to our partners who know their business and understand how these things fall in place, that we as a region can determine best how to respond. And so that's really why we're here today, is to get our best thinking on the table. I think, Christina, if you could just flash slide 2 for me, I just want to acknowledge these are the institutions that continue to step up. They've dedicated their top leadership in elected and staff, the decision makers who can do things within their organizations, to weigh in on strategy. They've been doing it for 4 years. And today we're really looking at short term, because housing solutions is a long game. It's a long game for every community, no matter how frustrating funding and regulatory issues come up. But today's conversation is really focused on what we can do in the more immediate short term in a creative way to start to alleviate some of the housing issues that we're feeling personally within the community and across our employment sector. So with that, thank you so much for being here, and let's get started.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. All right. Well, as you all know, we did send out a very brief poll with this initial meeting invite, and thank you to all who completed it. It was very helpful and insightful. So our questions were, how would you describe the current impact of housing conditions in our community? As a partner, would you like to see the Mountain Housing Council respond differently to this crisis? And what ideas do you have to create tangible solutions for our housing crisis in the next 6 months? Please explain. So as you can see from the responses to this first question, many of our partners feel that we are now in an off-the-charts urgent situation and at the tipping point of it. In addition, many of you feel like we should perhaps be taking a different approach when it comes to responding to the crisis. This is what I'm really hoping kind of frames our breakout discussions today, discussing realistic, short-term solutions that Mountain Housing Council can help make a reality. So how should Mountain Housing Council respond differently? These were some of kind of the general suggestions that came our way, although as we've explained, we're really going to get into the specific tangible solution suggestions in your breakout sessions today. But what we did was we organized some of the both specific and broad suggestions into 5 main categories that are kind of serving as the topic areas for our breakout sessions. And we've provided each of the session facilitators with the more detailed specific ideas that fit within those broad categories, so that every single idea that was submitted gets discussed today. And that being said, though, I want to make sure that I make it clear that there's always room for new ideas, and we are in no way limited to what suggestions were provided within the poll framework. Christina, do you want to go ahead and flash the spreadsheet that gathers some of the many suggestions that were provided? There were a lot of really, really helpful suggestions. I would say over 50 that we found really, really great, and we were able to kind of put into these larger frameworks that we'll talk about. So with that, we're going to get into our breakout groups. Christine, if you want to go ahead and slide. Yeah. So as you can see, you have a choice of 5 different topics that kind of encompass all of the different suggestions. As I mentioned, these guys kind of capture a lot of the different topics that were brought up. So please go ahead and go into whichever breakout room you'd like to. We're going to come back in half an hour, so at 8:50, to kind of recap and discuss some of the takeaways. Thank you.
Before we ask them to go to the breakout, can we just look at the next slide so they understand some of the ideas that are going to be discussed in each breakout? It might help them navigate to where they want to go.
Sure. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, so these are, for example, some of the specific ideas that fit into the breakout larger topics, for example.
Yeah, so a lot of you really wanted to talk about how to use public spaces for temporary and permanent housing, whether it's using parks or campsites or parking lots, and to use facilities for access to personal hygiene and health, like showers and just kitchens. We also have other ideas on the table where employers look at kind of co-investing in private property to acquire housing or hotels, and really try and take on capturing the housing inventory for the local workforce via our employers. There's a breakout specifically on emergency declarations for those of the jurisdictions who brought your emergency people to the table. This would be a good place for them to help us navigate what that really means. The housing funding is really just looking at what do we have, what can we go after in the short term and long term. And then finally, market regulation and incentives. There were a lot of ideas, honestly, some things that are already in place, like incentivizing ADUs, incentivizing local homeowners to rent. And so that is truly, helping people find housing through programs and incentives. So that should help you guys navigate to the right conversation. And each facilitator, I believe, has been asked to really walk you through the different ideas that are on the table. Ask if there are any others that want to be discussed. We have 30 minutes to do so. We're going to give you a 10-minute warning. So it can be fairly free-flowing based on these talking points these ideas that we've given you. But then at the 10-minute mark, we really want you to kind of start to transition about where do these conversations go from here, and who are the right partners, and what are the right next steps. We actually have a Mountain Housing Council meeting in July already scheduled. We will continue to have that. And so we have about a month to get some things in place. And so we want you to think creative. What we have here is really a conglomerate of what you've already shared, but if something's missing, please put it on the table. And otherwise, thank you to our facilitators for taking on that role. When we come back, we will spend about 5 minutes with each breakout in order to make sure that we've captured those next steps collectively as a Mountain Housing Council. This is just a beginning, y'all, and more work will be done, but this is the beginning of getting organized in a different way. So thank you so much for letting me kind of walk us through that piece.
Okay, great. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms. You'll be able to join the room that you are most interested in. The rooms are titled the same as you see here on the slide. And as Stacy said, you'll have 30 minutes. I'll give you a 10-minute warning. And are you able to join the room? Yep. Okay, I see people are starting to join. If anyone has any questions, you can return to the main room at any time.
All right, Christine, I have a question because I'm trying to figure out how to do that on a mobile device.
Oh, okay. That is a good question.
Or if you can put me into the one on public
Sure.
spaces, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And that was Bonnie, is that right? Supervisor
That's correct.
Gore?
I'm having trouble getting into a group. I can see the group, but I don't know how to get into it.
Hey, Fred, I can
tell.
Fred, I can tell you, I just figured it out myself, and I was just about to jump in. If you look to the right of the heading, there'll be a number of the people who are in there. Click that number, and then it'll open up and ask if you want to join in.
Got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It
And
works.
Great. Jeff Hens, can I
All right, Christina, is this the emergency declaration powwow?
No, it's not. You're still in the main room. I will put you there.
Okay.
Okay, so Jeff, I think I just assigned you. Do you see a pop-up to say join? Oh, okay, I think so. John Hester, can I put you in a room? What room would you like to be in?
Local government.
You should see a pop-up to join that group. Kai, what group would you like to join?
Hi, I'm Colin and I are kind of tag teaming here. The public spaces, please.
Great, you should see a pop-up window.
Thank you.
To Pete, what room would you like to join?
I just joined kind of late, and I'm hoping my internet connection is good enough for me here. I'm in a hotel room right now. It looks like, I'm just looking at where you guys need me. It looks like the housing funding and emergency declaration rooms are the ones with the least people in them. But is there, I didn't get any of the background. So if you just want to throw me in a room, and I'm happy to go join Tara in emergency declaration, since that's kind of a small group.
Sure.
I don't know if I know what all of the concepts are, but is there a quick rundown on what the goal is, or?
Yeah, let me share my screen with you, and you can see the slide that kind of gives you some of the ideas. So here are the groups, and then here are some of the ideas that partners had for each of those groups. So the emergency declaration, obviously a lot of these ideas are dependent on it. I would say almost the best one for you might be local. Well, it's up to you. Looking at this list, is there one that seems? Oops, did I actually share it? There we go.
Let's see. I mean, I'll talk about all of them. I don't care. Yeah, put me on. It doesn't matter to me. If you want me to join one of the smaller groups, just to add a body to that room, that's fine. Or I'll.
Sure.
They're all
Okay.
great conversation.
Sure. Why don't I add you then to the emergency declaration?
Sure.
Thanks for being so flexible. Oh, thanks, Rory. Why don't we put you in the biggest room then? That means public spaces. Are you okay to join that one? Moving you there now.
That out there.
Yeah, and Hillary, if could an emergency declaration unlock or allow for ordinances that allow for RVs on public land, et cetera? So loosening of restrictions that would allow for temporary camping, RV placement, tiny home placement, et cetera. Do you know?
An urgency ordinance is something that can, to make a change quickly. That does not require an emergency declaration, however. An urgency ordinance just requires findings by council that there's an urgent need to do the ordinance faster than we typically would do. So.
Okay. Thank you. I know we have some other county and town support here. So if you have anything to add in on this topic, it would be appreciated. And then Danielle, did I see that you were just raising your hand?
Yeah, I'll let them go first.
Mike Dent from Nevada County. There has been a lot of chatter on western side about sanctioned campgrounds and the wall that mostly by our nonprofit community. And the wall they keep hitting is zoning and disposal of waste and garbage. And then the other, we've done a little bit of research into it. It has been about 6 or 8 months since we looked at it. But a lot of it was driven by the community, by the community that would be using the space, and not by, let's say, the county going over here on this acre, you can camp for free. Because then it kind of turns into a little Wild West. You need some sort of supervision or rules. And what we've found through moving homeless people off mountains and basically taking communities of homeless people and putting them in motels and case managing them intensively is allowing them to create their own rules. And you'll be surprised how pretty strict they are with each other about behaviors and noise. But the wall we keep hitting that I hear is zoning, allowing for it, and then obviously, the $20,000 a month portable toilets. That's a big cost that piles up fast.
Thank you, Mike. Any other comments on that front, Danielle?
So just to provide some clarity on the FEMA element, because I do work closely with OES and I've done emergency response. They're correct. FEMA disaster is specifically for a human or natural disaster. So it wouldn't necessarily qualify for any sort of FEMA funding. However, there's commonly FEMA trailers up for auction, especially in California with all of our wildfires. I follow the GSA auction list often. I think there could be an opportunity to do a bulk purchasing through them and work with the federal FEMA to do a bulk purchasing if that was an action that the governments wanted to pursue. Obviously, the utility aspect is a challenging one, but I think you could come up with a solution. I mean, I think they could provide guidance on how those FEMA camps are set up, but it just wouldn't provide funding.
That's a great point, Danielle, because I know as I got to know FEMA, they build up their inventory typically by now because this is hurricane season, wildfire season, and they're building up knowing they could have 5 emergencies or 20 emergencies at one time, and they've got to distribute and allocate these trailer homes. So timing wise, in terms of tapping into inventory, might be good.
And Emily, I work with the state SWIC regularly. I would be happy to call him and get some guidance from him if there's anyone we can talk to. If that becomes, something that people want to move forward with.
I think it would be helpful, and it feels like we need to pursue everything from all angles right now. So let's add that as an action item. Is Danielle, you doing a little bit of research for us on that item? And I know that there are roadblocks to pursuing this, but if we took the roadblocks away, what could it look like? So we're talking about temporary housing on public land. Do we want to do a quick brainstorm about, what does that land look like? Is there opportunity in the region? Does anybody know of existing parcels? Alex Moralatos did share in the chat earlier that he has private land that he owns that he is willing to open up for temporary housing, RV use, etc. He has access to showers and bathrooms. So I'd be interested in hearing a quick, brainstorm on these are parcels we know of. These are landowners that we know of. If the restrictions weren't there, or an emergency ordinance or urgency ordinance did go in to or come into play. So we have Alex Moralatos land that may be available. Anybody like to contribute thoughts on that?
This is Sue Daniels. And the North Tahoe PUD also has several parcels that we are considering. They are residential zoned. We're considering doing something with. But my concern, talking to the people around in the neighborhoods around, is that these are in the park, and what is temporary? You know, what is the window that we're trying to fill? And, you know, do we know our sunset? When are we going to be able to move people into something more permanent? Because before we open the door and say, oh, yes, we recognize an emergency, the emergency is across the whole state. It's not just in the mountains here. As we're talking about western parts of our county, I mean, they're dealing with it. People are moving into the forests all around. So it's not just a local problem, it is a problem. But we have to realize that what does temporary mean? Can the government do something that will be acceptable, and then know that we have a sunset, that we can move people out, that we're going to move them on, and where's the next solution? Because otherwise we're just building a problem, and we have to be watchful for the end. So.
Right, and with the seasons that we have here, you know, there's the camping aspect and what happens when the winter hits and snow hits. So you're right in needing to be clear on a timeline. What are the next steps beyond that?
Emily, I just have a question, and I apologize. This may be just me being a bit naive, but I'm curious actually how many people would want to live in a tent, because I recognize there are housing issues, but I don't, you know, people have families, they may not be willing to live in a tent. So I'm just curious what the magnitude of the number of campsites or trailer sites that we're actually talking about trying to provide is, if anybody.
Do you have contributions before I weigh in here?
Yeah, Sean, I can chime in. From my conversations with business owners, seems like they have a lot of employees that are living out of their cars, not by choice. If I was in my young 20s, I might be doing the same thing and fine with it. I don't see this as an option for families. If this comes up for families, there's a lot of anger around it, actually. But the younger people that are single, that are already living in their trucks or their vans or their cars, that do it pretty much with ease, typically. But the issue is they don't have a legal, safe space to do it. So they're trying to find places to park, you know, hoping that the cops don't move them, you know, to give them a place with dignity would be nice. So there are, I don't know how many, but I know a lot of the restaurant owners and retail shops, probably some of their employees are living in their cars.
Understood. I guess the numbers are important because we have, as you guys know, we have a limited space, right? And so there are campgrounds, some owned by and managed by state parks, by Forest Service. So I'm just, you know, if we knew the numbers, it would be helpful.
So a few thoughts here, Sean. The Mountain Housing Council, you know, is working on their regional housing implementation plan right now, and part of that was that survey that they distributed and brought, I believe, 1,300 or 1,400 responses to last month. And I was reading through the results, including all of the full responses, and there was a number of respondents that said, currently living out of my car, currently homeless, in between houses, staying on couches. And I'm wondering if that data might actually help us at least, you know, put one mark in the ground for what that could look like. Additionally, I do know that through the school district, we've heard from a handful of employees that they are living out of their cars, and the school district is looking at, you know, they have the district office land. Is there a way to allow for people to stay there just so they have a safe place to sleep? We also have seasonal workers that are more comfortable living in their trailers or campers, but they're stating that they don't have a place that they can go to stay overnight or stay a couple nights without someone coming along and saying you need to move on. So it's pretty hard to put a number on it, though I think we do have some statistics that could help with that. Okay, so back to the kind of land brainstorm. You know, I would like us to identify if we know of a few parcels that could be potential for this. You know, we talked about the expense of bringing in restrooms and facilities, but are there parcels in our region that may already have access to that stuff? You know, campgrounds are obviously full right now, but is there something we could do on campgrounds? Alex Morlatos is a good example. He has land that has access to facilities. So among this group, are there other people or parcels that are known that we could include on a short list if we were able to move forward with something like this?
The parking lot that we have at TVRA, Tahoe Vista Recreation Area, we built a parking lot. It was discussed to allow trailers to park there in the winter time, because in the summertime, it's used by boaters. This year it is not, because our ramp is closed. Our beach users are using it some, but in winter for ski area trailers or something was a possibility. So that site could probably take in 10 to 12 trailers, for example.
Are there facilities there, Sue?
No, there's not. So the whole idea of creating infrastructure, that's when you start stepping in and saying, well, are we temporary or are we turning into something permanent? And so funding to actually build some facility there would be then the next step, is when we're talking about funding coming in from FEMA or other sources. Could we build a big enough restroom with showers there, which could be used in the summer for beachgoers too in the future, but as a temporary measure to allow that? Or would we only allow tiny home parked trailer type things that have their own facilities, have to drive off, and we could put in a drain. I think we could put in water and a drain, but that's a site that I look at as winter use, perhaps. Again, then entering into our park, we start looking at something where we're trying to do maybe something a little more permanent in the entry to the park, which we come into the complexity of, can it be for the general public, or does it have to be only employees within our district? Because we are a district, our funding comes from water and sewer, so we'd have to use it towards that. But those are some ideas. I keep going back to some of our motel stock and stuff that's in town that's closed up, that's already built, and that's going into private. But I know I'm stepping over borders of the breakout here, but I see so many old places that if we could get some sort of a government emergency to open up, like the old Garney Lodge up at the state line that has over 130 rooms there, and they were used up till just a couple years ago, and we could get something rebuilt there and house 130 workers, in that building. It's there. It's just being held for entitlements right now. So things like that are what I see as bigger, quicker solutions. But
yeah,
Sue, what was the name of that lodge? What was the name of that lodge?
It was the old Garney up at the state line, and it was renamed the Tahoe Inn, I think, or something like that. And I believe that Art Chapman and the group for Homewood is the current owner. They're holding it, I believe, for entitlements for housing when they develop Homewood in the future. But let's use it now while we're waiting for Homewood to develop. So
I think Andrew Ryan also has a client that is looking to change an old motel into housing, and they're ready. From my understanding, it's not a difficult shift. I think he would be someone to reach out to see if there's an opportunity, because I would agree with Sue. That should be, if there's some near-term actual existing infrastructure, buildings that are safe and habitable, of course, should be the first and foremost priority, because we do have hotels and such. I guess, there is that homeless funding that the state of California has put forth. It's just, can we qualify for that funding for these types of uses? That's where I'm not sure. But we have stock with the motels that we have here. I do think that should be a first priority before going to the public lands. But I also think having conversations with the Forest Service and state parks, they too are having employee shortages. So perhaps if they shift some of their camping locations to prioritize visitation in certain locations and allow for more workforce type camping in a few, that might actually reduce some of their burden that they are facing with the high demand we have here as well. So I don't know. I know Cindy has reached out to the Forest Service. I don't know what the outcome of that conversation was, but I think it would be a value to talk to both them and state parks because they have some as well.
Danielle, I like that idea. And just really quickly, in the old days when I worked for the Forest Service, they always had workforce housing. So at least they should house their employees. You always had camp monitors that would come in seasonally, bring their RVs, and they lived at each of the camps that they monitored. And I love your idea of at least housing the employees that work at our parks and such at a very minimum. So that would be great.
I know our Forest Service was looking at, I think the particular type is called Falcon Structures. They're kind of FEMA-like trailers, excuse me. And we started looking into this as the Workforce Housing Agency, and our struggle, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts here, our struggle was we have 4 members that have a ton of land, 60 to 80 open parcels, but none of them have utilities already. And so bringing in these FEMA-like trailers, you need some sort of connection or a way to bring waste out. It's similar to the discussion around opening up space for tents and RVs. How do you kind of control and manage those units? So I'd be interested to hear if anybody has any thoughts on that, because there is land that we can bring longer term structures onto, but you need the utilities to be able to bring, water to those structures, et cetera.
The other piece of land next to Alex Morlato's that used to be a campground specifically, that was behind the building that was torn down where Spindleshanks used to be in Tahoe Vista. I'm trying to remember if they still have their utilities in the ground, because they were a campground and they've been trying to develop it. And so they stripped the area of the campground entitlements. I think that could be easily brought back. But that would be another thought. Again, private property though.
Yeah, I think FEMA typically does more of like the Baker tank type situations where it's more temporary. I think Sue's statement of how long is the important factor here. I think that, is it a seasonal demand? Because winter situation's a whole different thing here.
Well, let's talk short term, medium, long term. So
Emily, before we jump into the short term, long term, medium, something that's I think a key statement is that these examples that we're using about critical temporary housing, in disaster relief and using that as a model, I think one of the most important factors that is missing from this conversation, whether it is about activating public land or what have you, is that in those disaster relief circumstances, FEMA or an equivalent state agency steps in and leads in terms of, we've identified the land, we've identified the demand, we've identified the resources, we've identified the necessary changes, and we are executing. And then the other regulatory agencies, the other partners fall in line. And I think overwhelmingly what is missing from this conversation, regardless of the fact of whether it's public land, reactivation of private land, is strong leadership at the helm on who is steering this ship to address the crisis. Otherwise, it is a bunch of idea makers, a bunch of people saying, well, I've got this little resource over here that could potentially be activated, but nobody is steering the ship at the moment. And that, without that, at least from a special district standpoint, as Sue stated, the NTPUD has land that could be considered, but the PUD is not a housing agency. We're not a general government entity. We can't take a leadership opportunity. We can't activate our land just for the sake of community housing and community benefit. California law restricts the NTPUD, Tahoe City PUD to water, sewer, and recreation. And housing doesn't fall in that. And so we could be a partner under the right auspices, but a county, a town, an entity with housing authority has to be the lead in this.
Thank you, Brad. Would anybody like to contribute thoughts on, I agree, that and the urgency ordinance or emergency declaration are probably those two big pieces. The declaration would allow us to make some of these moves, but someone needs to be leading it. Any thoughts or contributions here on, is this something that we would want to go to Placer County for? Is that the right agency that we may want to discuss opportunities with, see if there's an openness or availability for them to lead something like this? Are there thoughts on that?
I guess I know we saw the warning for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I just put my support behind advocating to state parks and the Forest Service for opening up at least some of their campsites that already have infrastructure for housing or for long-term, camping. I think that's the most ready-made solution that already has infrastructure. Otherwise, it's not as short-term.
I think we have some nodding heads here on that one. So I do have that as an action. Forest Service State Park shifting to allow some use for workforce, use of campsites. I have an action of looking at Alex Moralatos or other similar landowners to see if there is open land available for temporary, meaning this season. Open, I have an action for Danielle to do a little bit of research on what it looks like to follow a FEMA type structure. I also have an action around the state of California homeless funding, just to understand what that looks like. And I don't know if Allison or others with the temporary or supportive housing have thoughts on that one. Other actions that I've missed here.
Emily, I just wanted to echo Brad's comments. He's spot on that if we're able to tap into probably the best resource to help on a quick basis, like FEMA is going to require a government side, and I think Placer County makes the most sense. It really does, to try to use them as our tip of the spear, and then we all come in as partners.
And Emily, I would just say, as far as the funding's concerned, I would probably look to Mike Dent or Kathy, who's on this call, around the homeless funding, or if there's any other dollars that we could leverage to support this effort.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, what is the definition of homeless that funding supports and allows for? Also on the action items, there was a brief conversation about the motel stock. The other group that's talking about private land is talking about this, so I did write down what you had mentioned so that I can share that with them. But I know there is conversations around accessing existing hotels, motels. Can we use some hotel rooms for certain periods of time, very, very short term? So I have that as an action to share as well. Other items that you'd like us to elevate or bring back to the group.
Has there been conversation about like the ski resort dormitories being utilized off season? I'm sure there has, but I'm new to this.
Those are used year round.
All of them are?
I think North Star uses their employee housing year round. Squaw Valley.
Okay.
From my understanding, no expert, but I believe they're used year round.
Okay.
Yeah, I can jump in here. So North Star, we don't own that housing, but it's called Sawmill Heights, and it's filled year round and with a extremely long wait list. So there's no opportunity there.
And then Jerusha, do you still manage or lease the property in Kings Beach?
We do, Candlestick. And actually just one thing that, word of caution on that, with those old structures, a lot of other problems come forward. Sue, I know you were talking about some of those different hotels and such that we should tap into. It's just that with the old antiquated sewers and that sort of thing, it can become a maintenance nightmare, and it's not easy to manage. So just a thought there, not trying to be negative, but there are some issues with that. And yes, it's full.
Thanks, Teresa. Okay, in our last few minutes, we've identified some actions, but we are going to need people to contribute some time to researching and outreach. Danielle, you've stepped up to do some research on kind of the FEMA emergency response side. On the Forest Service State Park side of things, it sounds like someone mentioned that Cindy Gustafson has already been in contact with Forest Service or state parks.
I believe she's talked to at least the Forest Service. She mentioned that at the meeting on Tuesday. I'm not sure about state parks though.
Okay.
I think they would want to hear from her directly. So I think she would be the right person.
Okay, so it's a outreach or circle back with Cindy to identify the conversation she's had already and identify whether state park has already been brought into the conversation. I'm happy to take that one. And then on the, identifying an agency to manage or going to Placer County and understanding how they can contribute or support. Does the group have a thought around what that action looks like, or if the focus should be push and advocate for emergency declaration, urgency ordinance, and Placer County falls in under that?
Go ahead.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hi. I can only say from limited research of looking at potentially using a church parking lot to maybe put pallet structures in or smaller term pieces like that, that the zoning was the big issue. And so I've been told by like the pallet companies and the places that have been doing that successfully over the last year that the emergency declarations are a huge importance to moving things quickly. So that's just what I've learned in my bit of research on that over the last year with the home key.
Thank you, Kathy. And Bonnie, do you want to share something?
Oh, sure.
Oh, we lost her. Should click the leave the breakout room button. Well, we can follow with Bonnie on that. It looks like we're closing out soon, but
it's ending in 60 seconds. So
okay,
it's what happened. I was like, hey, yeah, Placer County will step up.
And then I do that too because it's so automatic to like see the window and want to hit the button. You have to really think to not do that. Especially if you're speaking, and then you're seeing the button and going for it. So,
because
I understand,
they're all coming back in, correct?
Yeah. So, with they'll slowly be trickling through, and then at 1 minute it automatically closes it.
Yeah, because I think it was at 1 minute. That's why I don't think I can get back in.
Sure, no problem. Welcome back, everyone.
Christina, I have to say you manage these transitions pretty well.
Thank you. It's really Zoom, not me, but thank you.
Break room to out of break room to.
She's so good with technology.
I know.
She really is. She handles it so smoothly. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. I assume we have everyone, right, Christina?
I believe so.
Okay, great. I hope your groups were productive. We're just going to kind of bring up some brainstorming ideas that facilitators provide us with. I'm going to have each facilitator talk a little bit about some of the ideas that came up, starting with our public spaces group. Emily Vitus, do we have you?
Hey, Tara, thank you.
Hi.
And Kathy Foley was also taking notes. So Kathy, if you have anything to contribute, I'm going to just speak based on what I believe the action items were that came out of this, but please let me know if there's something that I miss. So lots of discussion around, use of public land, lots of discussion around an urgency ordinance or an emergency declaration. some of the main action items that came from our discussion or what we see as the needs that we need to pursue are advocating for an urgency ordinance or an emergency declaration of some sort. That means looking at the counties and the town to pursue. We talked a little bit about what a FEMA response could look like, though FEMA is more specific to natural disasters, but do you have a volunteer to kind of look into what that emergency response looks like? Reaching out to the Forest Service and state parks to ask if they can allow for use of some of their campsites for workforce housing. Looking at a couple of our private and public landowners that may already have utilities in the ground or access to restrooms, showers, etc. We did start a list of those properties. Identifying an agency to manage some of this. So if an emergency ordinance were in place, you need a leader to be able to pursue this stuff and manage it effectively, access land, etc. We did talk about Placer County feeling like, and County Truckee as well, feeling like the agency to potentially lead this. We also talked about looking at land trusts in addition to the Forest Service and State Park for land to access. Another big conversation piece was the short, medium, and long term of what temporary and emergency housing looks like. We're a seasonal community, and short term meaning find something for the summer, and then you start to get into what does winter look like, and longer term while housing is being built, or we're hopefully seeing a shift in the market. So the discussion around what those kind of terms look like and how you respond to those differently. So some good actions came out of it, and we did have a couple of volunteers that will pursue some of this stuff as we continue to research and pursue. And Kathy, did I miss anything on the kind of action items?
No, I was going to say the only one that I still had here is that there was discussion about really looking into some of the properties for more the medium long term, some of the properties that potentially are already built. Maybe it's hotels or things of that range. But then there was also the warning on the other side. Was it Jerusha who has the experience of the fact that that may look like a good long term idea, but it's a lot of those need a lot of work and there's lots of challenges. So that was just.
Mm-hmm. Well, great, guys. That's some great brainstorming.
Thanks, Tara.
If facilitators can possibly, and I know this is asking even more of you, could possibly send in some of these notes to me, that would be really, really helpful. Because it sounds like you guys came up with some really great takes on suggestions that were already provided and then came up with some new ones as well. So I want to make sure we capture all of them.
Of course.
I want to just jump in and ask, can we identify what we're bringing back in July? So if there was somebody who said, I'll take the lead on doing the skunk work for that, every action item that comes out of these breakout sessions, I feel obligated in July to come back. Even if something got tabled because you ran into a wall, we're generating these ideas for action. And so I would love to get to July with some further down the road stuff. Emily, is there anything specifically that came out of your breakout group that we can capture for a report back in July?
Let me get together with Kathy and compare notes, and then we can actually share the items and those that were tied to those items. Does that work?
Yes. Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Yeah, we'll make sure that prior to our July quarterly meeting, what I'll do is make sure I've connected with each of the facilitators and we've kind of done some of this groundwork for that. So that's a great idea. Okay, private property and employer-led housing solutions. Tamia.
Yes, thank you. We had a really good discussion and I tried to take really fast, quick notes. So I invite my group to jump in here and correct me or add anything that I have missed. So in general, acting quickly on a private property is really tough because there's not enough funding. In general, when it comes to building, there are a lot of hoops to jump through. And so one of the biggest idea that came to the table is how can we create a co-op model that teamed up with the financing team and hopefully de-restrict some of the local housing move quickly. this co-op, because in general, if a private company acquires a hotel or a motel that is for sale, and there's one in Kings Beach, one in Tahoe City, and one in Tahoe Donner, that a lot of employers are looking to purchase. Currently, a lot of them are occupied. So how do we balance of, okay, they're occupied. It's if by locals, and if the employer throws them out, it's good for them as a business, but it's not good for the community in general. So for example, Squaw Valley, it probably, that wouldn't work for them because, acquire property with occupants in it. It's definitely can be a challenge or a deal breaker in many cases. So if there is, and then again, the numbers don't pan out many times for an employer to acquire these hotels, and it's hard to get a commercial loan. So where can we look at for an emergency funding? If every single employer looks at these motels or hotels to acquire, then there is, are they bidding out each other and are bidding against each other? The one who has the most money will throw the other one. And again, it's not equitable financially, it doesn't pan out. So this co-op model sounds like a really, really good idea. And whoever is willing to jump in here, whether that is TTCF or MHC or a group of board of directors, jumps in here and helps to create this co-op model, to coming up with a mechanism that helps to put this in place. And another reason why sometimes acquiring a hotel or motel, it can be difficult, not just because financially it doesn't pan out, but also there are not enough high quality hotels in Tahoe Truckee area. And if that is bought out and offered to deed restricted or offered to local housing, then more and more single homes become short-term rentals. And we are losing out on the short-term rentals versus, David, I think you had this idea, like not in, so targeting short-term rentals and giving them incentives to take their house off the short-term rental market and make it long-term for locals. That is an idea that came to the table. We talked briefly about what properties can we look at to convert a single home to a 2, 3, or 4 unit, or make an office space, a commercial building convert it into local housing. But again, that takes a lot of time. And we are looking at Placer County to perhaps help with this, to help with the plans and in general when it comes to converting single home units to more than 2 units, help with the steps, make it shorter, not a lot of hoops to jump through. Anyways, what else did I leave out?
Did you guys talk at all about some of the existing incentive programs, like Truckee's program for homeowners, the funds, the $3,000 that's provided to them to kind of rent their home out for more than 12 months to local workforce, and kind of whether those programs are sufficient or whether we can do more with those programs?
I think we can do more with those programs.
Okay, that's what your group.
That's the general sense, but Billy, David, please feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, to me, if I could echo what David had said in our group, is that if we're working on an emergency situation, the housing stock that we have is the short-term rental housing stock. That's what's stolen our long-term stock, and if we can get it back, we can get it back quickly. It exists, and if we can use market forces to incentivize people to change it back, $3,000 is probably not enough. But if we could do it for a longer period, and if we had funding sources that were not traditional, whether they be grants, public funds, or one philanthropic billionaire would go a long way, then we could put in a program in place like that very quickly, because it would just be, you could be managed by a town or whatever, and then the private market forces take over, and you don't have to have people to manage it. You just need one person in an office. So that was Dave's idea. And Dave, if I missed something, throw that out.
Great. So maybe the thought was, as of now, it's been government providing some of those grants, and maybe we start looking at outside sources to maybe fund some of these incentive programs, fundraising outside of
Yes,
that.
yeah, I think we as business owners, the business owners in the group, were saying we'd put money into the pool. We could match, but whether it be public or private, but commercial lending isn't cutting it.
Right. And would that become employee housing, Billy? Yes. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Great.
And if it's this co-op model, you put X amount of money in, then you get X amount of units for your employees.
Interesting. Okay. And did you guys discuss at all about whether you need any data from Mountain Housing Council in order to kind of get enough employers to participate in this co-op model? For example, do you need data on turnover costs? Do you need data on, how much, basically, whether it's worth a business participating?
I think when you're talking to all the business owners don't need data. We need solutions now. And so the data is less important. If there's a model that feels equitable and fair, we're much more willing to take a chance than a local government entity or taxpayer dollars, type of thing. So just speaking in my duality, I'm much more conservative with my constituents' dollars than I'm going to be with my own dollars. I'm ready to invest now to help my employees solve the problem. I don't care about the data. The data's there. We know it's an issue. Let's move on.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you.
If I could interject a couple thoughts here. There was general consensus of all the business owners that a cooperative model at a minimum that prevents us from competing if we go out and acquire. But the model actually where we need assistance is the gap funding between market rate and what would be realistic cost of an acquisition. And what is that model? We need somebody to help us define that model and the pieces, including the funding element. And then, like Dave and Billy were saying, an equitable method so that businesses can come in and participate. And the distinction here is that this is a private model versus the public housing model that we're already working on. So there's a balance. That's critical. And then the concept of displacement was really important. That's what we're talking about, is how can we acquire something and then displace existing workers? So that's a critical issue that needs to be addressed. And the other thing that I think needs to be amplified is there was good discussion about current inventory that could be both acquired and converted if it's business converted to living space or existing living space being changed from single to multifamily. But also there's potentially opportunities in things like the Calneva, things that sit there right now that we could aggressively go after and secure. And one of the business owners was talking about opportunities with master leases. So there are probably some tactical things that could be done to secure housing immediately. If we start, so the assistance is, let's go get those property owners, let's identify them and approach them. And the last thing I'd say is, we should not stop here. We should bring these businesses back together frequently with dialogue and direction and start to pursue these immediately so that there isn't competition and there's more collaboration. And I think that falls squarely on TTCF or the Mountain Housing Council.
So Stacy and I are already talking about all of the various groups that are going to be formed and we'll meet right away just based on this group and all the great ideas that have come out of this. So that is one thing, that's what we're here for. So that is one thing that we will make sure we do. So that's great. You guys had some fantastic ideas. I'm really impressed. So thank you. Sorry, local government, Emily Setzer?
Sure. So I just sent you our notes. We have a lot of overlap with some of the other topics, as you can imagine, because we all have to work together. We covered some ideas that are more short-term and some that are more long-term. So I'll probably just focus more on the shorter-term solutions verbally. Under measures that local governments could do to put in place to protect citizens when the market heats up, ideas that came up were rent control caps to prevent the gouging, eviction moratoriums, short-term rental license moratoriums for the new permits that are coming in, and then to set a cap and gradually diminish and hit that cap at the end. Installation of hardship mobile homes or FEMA trailers, some other sort of fast housing, and how we can help permit those quickly. For incentive programs for local homeowners, we talked about expanding and utilizing the Landing Locals program to convert short-term rental or second homes to long-term rentals. We also talked about opening that program up not just to whole houses, but to individual rooms. And then we also discussed a campaign to all homeowners in the region to encourage renting rooms or houses. We talked about allowing subdivisions, which is a little longer term, to allow existing single family to become duplex, triplex, etc. And then we also talked about a vacancy tax. So you have the carrot and the stick approach for underutilized residential, like a second home. For converting existing buildings, our short-term topics focused on converting maybe some of the hotel, motel properties that exist, encouraging motel owners to convert some or all of their rooms to single room occupancy, which is a longer term rental solution, and to help fast track those standards. And then can local governments help identify or encourage public lands that can be utilized for housing, or help or encourage an inventory of underutilized existing buildings. So we have commercial buildings in the area. We have a lot of churches. We have some ski clubs, things like buildings like those that exist. Can we task people to inventory them and then actually find the owners and reach out to them and come up with some sort of incentive? Some of the other creative solutions would be kind of expanding what the county has as a hardship dwelling, or allowing RVs for longer than what are currently allowed. So allow RVs to park at people's homes, installation of tiny houses, some sort of funding program to help renters with their first or last month's rent or moving costs. Looking into some public-private partnerships for funding. From the public side, governments could look into CARES Act and other COVID-related hardship situation pandemic funds, general fund, our TBID and TOT funding. It was brought up that we have an Olympic-based developer here who does emergency farm worker modular housing. So we have him on the list. And then are there ways that the county or the town can trade kind of with some of our major employers who we know already have applications underway or applications that are coming for development? Could we kind of waive fees, help them out, expedite the process in the future down the line in order to utilize their properties now? And I think that covers it from a high level.
Wow, Emily. That's pretty impressive. That's great. One issue that I keep hearing about is just inventory. It sounds like folks really could use and benefit from knowing a little bit more about existing inventory and what's available. Emily Vitus, you and I talked about this a long time ago and kind of finding some quick way to research what inventory is out there. Does anyone have any ideas for ways we could kind of very quickly get an idea of what inventory we might have available?
I know that some of the Tiger team groups through Mountain Housing Council have used Google Docs in the past. So if there were a way to use a Google Docs spreadsheet and allow people to go in and edit by category, maybe it's categorized by public lands, government lands, commercial, church, resort, something like that.
Right. Yeah, no, I just mean to kind of get a hold of some of these addresses and find out what's available out there. We were kind of using Zillow and things like that to try to find out, you know, available real estate that maybe could be purchased, basically. And we're just wondering, I think Emily and I, if there was another way to find out all of the existing inventory within Truckee, for example, or Placer. So maybe that would be something that someone could take on, that maybe a Tiger team could take on, because it sounds like all of these groups could benefit from knowing that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to housing funding. Heidi.
Thanks, Tara. Hi, everybody. We talked about having a more flexible funding in the region. Not so specific tied, like the Martis Fund is tied to certain projects. Increasing TTCF's Housing Solutions Fund, that's a more flexible source of funding. So doing some fundraising around that. Creating a housing entity, which could also have land holdings, et cetera. Working with the faith-based communities. There's a lot of donors sitting in churches on Sundays. So really accessing those donors. Also, something that came up was a communications plan or impact mailing or something to all the community members, the new community members, you know, how can they give back, you know, really informing everyone of the needs in our community in a way to, as a way to fundraise. Those are the key, you know, talking with the chamber does a lot of work in TTCF with new members in our community. So really accessing those new people, and maybe even through the real estate community, some voluntary dollars when they sell houses, or fundraising through the real estate community themselves, and giving back is one way. And so we really discussed next short-term step would be to pursue this community level campaign that TTCF would facilitate with the support of the Mountain Housing Council. You know, their funds are flexible, so increasing those funds. And then more of a long-term strategy would be, you know, housing and land holdings that we could access and working through, you know, housing trust. And yes, anything else, Stacy? Anyone else in my group? Did I miss anything? So I'm bringing the housing trust piece to the housing funders network meetings, agendicize that. So we can formally discuss that. So.
Great. Thank you, Heidi.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to provide a quick recap of Emergency Declarations Group. It was a really productive group with Bob Womack and Pete Fenolio. Bob was just kind of a great source of knowledge in terms of his experience with emergency disaster response. One thing that was really interesting that he brought up was just that there is an alternative to an emergency declaration, and that is the urgency clause. And just the fact that the urgency clause provides a lot of the same benefits as an emergency declaration, but it does allow for a public hearing, which means that folks could feel a little bit more heard, as opposed to an emergency declaration whereby sometimes the public feels that they weren't heard, and because there usually aren't hearings. Of course, you always can hold a public hearing, but typically with emergency declarations, it's so that it can be done right away. While the emergency clause offers kind of that similar quick action, and while also having a public hearing come along with it. Obviously, some of the benefits of having an emergency declaration is that it does go up to the state of California and then up to FEMA. So you do have the benefit of asking for funding. The only issue being something that Bob pointed out was that FEMA has been kind of turning down some of these requests of late if they don't have a very specific category for things to fall into. And with housing, housing replacement has been a category in the past, but it's been very associated with very specific events. And so there is a certain amount of uncertainty around whether they would provide any kind of funding for housing around an emergency declaration like this. And it would be really worthwhile to get in touch with some of the officials in Crested Butte, Colorado, to ask them questions about this process, because what the media has largely covered has been what Crested Butte as a locality has voted on, and not kind of what's happened when it's gone up to the state and up to FEMA, and kind of that the results of that process. So another idea was, what would happen if, for example, Mountain Housing Partners simply requested, town councils and counties to basically vote on a proclamation, and would that be helpful if it didn't have any teeth? A proclamation that, we are basically, we would like you to recognize that we are in a state of emergency with housing. Would that do anything? Would that change anything? Would that carry any kind of force? So that's basically what we talked about. And, Bob gave us some insight as to the kinds of findings that would need to come along with any kind of emergency declaration or urgency clause, such as a public health crisis when people don't have access to housing. Sometimes there's sewage problems and things of that nature. So that's basically what we discussed in our group. So with that, I just kind of wanted to, we have a couple minutes left, so I just wanted to thank everyone again for kind of coming together and check to see if anybody had any kind of last questions or thoughts that I didn't get around to. Samir, I know you had your hand up earlier and I totally missed you. I'm not sure if he's still with us. We will. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I am. But I forgot my thought.
That's okay. We're going to circulate notes and we're going to make some plans for groups that can meet between now and our July 23rd meeting. So you'll all have access to some of the great brainstorming that came out of this session. I just want to again thank you and turn things over to Stacy to say some final words.
It feels like this work never goes fast enough. And for our community members who are losing, it didn't go fast enough. And so I just want to acknowledge that this is a very stressful time. It's playing on our mental health. It's playing on our economy. And I just want to thank everybody for participating. I see 5 very tangible action items coming out of this. I can see a path to work with staff to get us to July, and it's going to require you guys to keep showing up with us. We're going to pause on our existing meeting structure of the working groups unless they are driving some of these short-term solutions. And so with that, please know that by Monday morning, you're going to have a recap of the 5 things that we're pursuing together. And we are hoping that you will show back up in a Tiger team. Tiger teams have a beginning, middle, and end. They're not ongoing infrastructure. It's to solve a problem at the moment. And that's what we're going to do. So with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful Friday. Take a deep breath. You're doing really great work. And we're so glad to have you part of this.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.
Great job, guys.
Thank you. Excellent.